It's like every time you think you've got a handle on what's happening in the world, bam, something else pops up.
Yeah, trying to stay informed these days can feel a bit like trying to drink from a fire hose, right?
Exactly. And I bet a lot of you listening feel the same way. That's why we do this deep dive to kind of cut through all the noise and pull out what really matters.
Right. And this time, we've been going deep on a bunch of sources, but particularly this issue of The Economist from April 5th, 2025.
So, our mission, as always, is to give you those aha moments, like the things you didn't know you needed to know,
Hmm.
from big global shifts to those smaller, under-the-radar developments that could actually be way more significant than people realize.
Yeah. We're talking geopolitics, economics, all those big societal trends,
Yeah.
even some things that might surprise you.
For sure. And this time, we're going to be all over the map. Literally. We'll touch on Finland rethinking its defense strategy with Russia right on their doorstep, then jump over to Africa, some very fragile peace agreements there, and some countries making some interesting new friends, shall we say.
Hmm. That's an interesting way to put it.
Then we'll dive into Trump's latest trade moves and how the whole world is reacting, take a spin through the EV market, Tesla versus BYD. Oh, and we can't forget Elon Musk. Always seems to be up to something.
Yes.
This deep dive, it's going to be global. We'll even explore how China is playing the economic and geopolitical chessboard, touch on some unexpected turns in Syria and France, and see what's going on with Argentina's economic tightrope walk.
That's quite the mix.
Oh, and because we like to keep things interesting, we'll even touch on the mind-blowing potential of transplanting mitochondria. Also, the strange world of economics you see in refugee camps, and hey, even what Usain Bolt's been up to.
Sounds like a wild ride. Let's do it.
Okay, let's kick things off with Finland and their increasingly complicated relationship with Russia, especially with that long border they share.
Hmm.
What struck you there?
Well, Finland, along with Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland,
Yeah.
they all decided to ditch that global treaty banning landmines. And they're very clearly connecting it to Russia.
Yeah, that's a bold move. And then you add in their plan to boost defense spending to at least 3% of their GDP.
Exactly. They're sending a clear message. They're taking their security seriously. And you got to wonder, what does that signal to the rest of Europe, especially those countries close to Russia?
Right. But then you get this different tone from Finland's president, Alexander Stubb. He's talking about the need to eventually, mentally prepare to restore relations with Russia at some point down the line.
Yeah. That sparked a bit of controversy, didn't it?
It did. It's a tough line to walk, acknowledging the very real threat right now, while also not completely shutting the door on any future possibility of, getting back to some kind of normal relationship.
It's about long-term strategy, really. Defense is essential right now, but you can't just completely isolate yourself from a neighbor like Russia forever.
Absolutely. And speaking of Russia, they're making some big moves too. Just announced a massive conscription drive, 160,000 men, ages 18 to 30. That's their biggest intake since way back in 2011.
It's a significant move, especially when you consider they're saying these new recruits won't be sent to fight in Ukraine.
Right, that detail really jumps out. What do you make of it? Are they just beefing up their overall military for potential future needs beyond Ukraine?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely signals that they are not backing down from their military ambitions, even as the war in Ukraine drags on.
And staying with Ukraine for a moment, we have Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov basically flat out rejecting America's proposals for ending the war.
Huh.
He says they're not acceptable because they don't address what he calls the root causes of the conflict.
It's a clear indication that a negotiated solution is still a long way off. Russia's insistence on framing the conflict in terms of these unspecified root causes suggests a continued unwillingness to compromise.
Makes you wonder what those root causes really are, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
Shifting gears a bit, let's head over to Africa. The African Union is stepping in to try and mediate the situation in South Sudan. It seems that 2018 peace deal, which was always pretty fragile to begin with, is really on the verge of collapse.
Yeah, and the situation between President Salva Kiir and Senior Vice President Riek Machar has gotten really tense. Machar being put under house arrest is a big red flag.
A huge red flag. Could easily spark another civil war. Do you think the African Union can actually pull this back from the brink?
It's going to be a massive challenge for sure. The situation is incredibly volatile. But having some external mediation is probably their best shot at avoiding another full-blown conflict.
Let's hope so. And further north, in the Sahel region, we're seeing Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger cozying up to Russia. Their foreign ministers were just in Moscow looking to strengthen those ties.
And it's no coincidence that all three of those countries are ruled by military juntas and have recently booted out French and other Western troops that were helping fight jihadists.
So is this a sign of Russia expanding its influence in Africa?
It's certainly part of a broader trend. These countries might be looking for new allies, new security partners, and Russia is stepping in to fill that void.
All right, time to get into economics. Trump has announced a whole new wave of tariffs, and it looks like China's going to feel it the most.
Yeah, the average tariff on goods from China is now going to be over 60%. Bangladesh will face a 24% tariff, Vietnam 46%, and China gets hit with another 34% on top of what they were already paying.
So that brings it to a whopping 65% for China. Ouch. But it's not everyone, right?
Correct. The punitive tariffs that were already in place on cars and steel from certain countries, those will stay as they are. No additional increases based on the country.
Interesting. It's almost like a targeted approach for those sectors.
Could be.
What about Mexico and Canada? Looks like they could avoid these new tariffs.
As long as they play by the rules of the North American Trade Pact, their goods can still enter the U.S. duty-free. But if they don't comply, that 25% tariff still applies.
Makes sense. But all this tariff talk is already having an effect, right?
Oh, yeah. The markets are spooked. U.S. stocks just had their worst quarter since Q3 2022. A lot of uncertainty around trade policy, plus those general economic anxieties everyone's feeling.
Not a good mix.
Not at all.
Now, this one's interesting. India might actually benefit from these tariffs on other Asian countries.
Especially since pharmaceuticals, which are a big export for them to the U.S., are exempt.
Smart move. Though, to be fair, the overall trade between the U.S. and India is still pretty small. Only about 3% of India's GDP.
True, but still, any advantage helps in this global trade game.
And some countries are reacting in another way. Japan and South Korea, they've actually restarted trade talks with China.
After 5 years of no talks, it shows you how these tariffs are pushing countries to find new partners, new ways to do business.
Yeah, China's ambassador to India even said they're open to buying more from them.
Smart move on their part. While America's putting up walls, China's building bridges, strengthening relationships.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about those electric vehicles. The numbers are in for Q1, and man, what a difference between Tesla and BYD.
Yeah, Tesla's deliveries actually dropped by 13% compared to last year, didn't meet expectations at all, and their stock took a big hit, down 36% in Q1.
Yikes. Meanwhile, BYD, they're absolutely killing it. Deliveries of pure electric vehicles were up 39%, and their overall passenger vehicle deliveries jumped a massive 58%.
It's a real changing of the guard in the EV world. BYD's momentum is undeniable.
And speaking of big moves, did you see what Elon Musk is up to? His company, XAI, just bought X.
You mean the platform formerly known as Twitter? Yeah, for a cool $45 billion, even more than he paid for it the first time around.
Crazy, right? And the details are kind of sketchy. Nobody really knows the exact structure of the deal.
Right. Regulators are probably going to have some questions about that one. Musk says it's all about combining computing power, data, all that good stuff to really push AI forward. But honestly, who knows what he's really up to?
He always keeps us guessing.
He does.
Let's talk about money, the kind most of us only dream of. The new Forbes billionaire list is out. A record-breaking 3,028 millionaires around the globe.
Wow. And the U.S. still leads the pack, followed by China and Hong Kong, then India.
Yeah. And no surprise, Elon Musk is still sitting pretty at the top, worth an estimated $342 billion.
Hard to even wrap your head around that kind of wealth, isn't it?
It is. And we've got some new faces joining the billionaire club this year, too. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jerry Seinfeld, Bruce Springsteen. Even with all the economic ups and downs, it seems some folks are doing just fine.
The rich get richer, as they say.
Now, let's shift our focus to China's big picture strategy. We're seeing some interesting developments there, especially regarding the private sector. Xi Jinping's deputy, Li Qiang, was recently praising innovators in Hangzhou, calling them dragons, no less.
It's a noticeable change in tone compared to that whole common prosperity crackdown we were hearing so much about. Maybe they realized they went a bit too hard and scared off some of the very people they need to keep the economy humming.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And they're still pushing for economic stimulus, right?
Absolutely. They need to stabilize the property market, get people spending again.
Right. And all this focus on internal growth could actually help China on the global stage. If they can boost domestic consumption, they'll rely less on exports.
Exactly. Less need to flood the market with cheap goods, which will hopefully ease some of that trade tension with other countries. It's a way to create a more balanced, stable global economy.
And with America raising those trade barriers, It seems China sees an opportunity. They're talking about investing in manufacturing within partner countries as opposed to just exporting to them.
It's a really clever strategy, building closer economic ties, creating jobs in those countries, and let's be honest, probably sidestepping some of those U.S. tariffs along the way.
Yeah, it's like a win-win for China and their partners.
But meanwhile, things are pretty unclear with America's China policy. You've got the hawks who want to contain China, but then you have Trump, who seems to kind of admire Xi. Remember when he sent Senator Daines to Beijing to explore a deal? Yeah. It's a real mixed message, leaves everyone guessing what America's long game is.
Totally. And China is betting that America won't try to pull Russia away from them, like some kind of reverse Kissinger move.
Right. They're seeing those close ties between Russia and China as something fundamental, driven by shared interests, a shared suspicion of the U.S.
And they see those Trump policies, all that America First stuff, as basically a rejection of traditional American values.
A rejection of what the U.S. supposedly stood for on the global stage. And China's thinking, hey, this is our chance. We can be the stable, reliable partner, especially for those countries in the global south.
Makes sense. The article even suggests that China might try to position itself as a leader on climate change.
Spread those clean technologies, be bolder about reducing their own emissions, could be a huge image boost for them internationally.
For sure. But let's not forget, China's got its own set of risks to manage. A trade war with the U.S. could trigger a global recession. And if a deal with Trump falls through, he might just lash out, with currency manipulation, more sanctions.
It's a delicate game they're playing. A lot depends on Xi Jinping and his next move.
Okay, let's talk about Syria for a moment. Some interesting developments there. Bassam al-Shara, he became interim president back in late January, and he's been busy.
Appointing that interim cabinet. It includes members of minority groups, some technocrats, even a woman. It's like they're finally trying to be a little more inclusive after all these years.
It's a start, right?
Yeah.
And they're planning to hold elections within the year. Supposedly, over 90% of Sunnis are in favor of it.
That's significant, given they're the majority in Syria. It shows you how much people want a more representative government after everything that's happened.
Yeah, people are tired of the old ways.
Definitely.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There are still some deep divisions in Syria.
Yeah. Those polls show a huge gap between how Sunnis and Alawites feel about the future. A lot of work to be done before they can truly reconcile.
And most Syrians aren't too happy about Shara's idea of integrating those foreign fighters into the national forces. They overwhelmingly want to see Islamic law restored.
It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out in the elections. It's clear what the people want, but will the government actually listen?
We'll have to wait and see. Now, over in France, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the National Rally, she's facing some legal troubles.
Got a suspended sentence for misusing public funds. Not a good look for someone who wants to be president.
Definitely not. And of course, the National Rally is crying foul. They're saying it's all a conspiracy by the elites to keep them out of power.
It's a familiar tactic, playing the victim, claiming the system is rigged against them. And you know what? It works surprisingly well.
It does. And it's got people across the political spectrum talking. Even some on the hard left, like Jean-Luc Mélenchon, are supporting Le Pen.
Interesting, right? They're saying, look, even if you don't agree with her, the voters should be the ones to decide her fate, not the courts. It raises some questions about how much power the judiciary should have over elected officials.
For sure. Okay, let's jump over to Argentina. Javier Milei, their president, he's being touted as the guy who can finally fix their economy. He's all about cutting costs and deregulation.
Since he took over in December 2023, he's certainly been shaking things up, trying to break away from those old economic patterns that just never seem to work for Argentina.
Yeah, let's not forget they've had a long history of relying on IMF bailouts. Even with Milei devaluing the peso, their foreign currency reserves are still in the red. It's a precarious situation.
It is. Argentina's relationship with the IMF is, well, complicated. It's a cycle of bailouts and broken promises of reform.
And yet there are people who say the IMF should actually give Argentina a really good deal right now. They argue that Milei is their best chance at real reform.
They say he's achieved a fiscal surplus. That's got to count for something. So will the IMF take that risk? Only time will tell.
All right, let's change gears entirely and talk about something that affects almost everyone. Daylight saving time. We all kind of just accept those groggy mornings after the clocks spring forward, but research is showing that it might be doing some serious harm to our health.
Yeah, and it's not just a temporary thing. We're talking long-term negative effects.
I always thought it was just a minor annoyance, but apparently it really messes with our internal clocks. our circadian rhythms.
Exactly. See, our bodies rely on light exposure, especially blue light in the morning, to regulate all sorts of processes. When we change the clocks, we're basically throwing our bodies off balance.
And the consequences.
Less sleep, higher risk of weight gain and obesity, even a potential impact on our wages. Teenagers get hit especially hard. They're already sleep deprived, and DST makes it even worse.
Oh. And that doesn't even include the short-term risks, right?
Right. Even that 1-hour shift can cause people to lose sleep. Studies show people lose, on average, about 40 minutes of sleep the night after the time change. More accidents, more mistakes at work, more health problems. It makes you wonder, is it really worth it?
It does make you think.
It does.
Okay, this one might seem a bit wonky, but it's important. The U.S. government's new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, is proposing some pretty big budget cuts to those federal statistical agencies.
Yeah, they're talking about huge staff reductions, which could mean less accurate data, less frequent surveys. That's a big deal.
These agencies might not be flashy, but they gather crucial data about everything.
Yeah.
Health, housing, the environment, even the level of lead in our blood.
Exactly. That data informs so many important decisions, policies. It's vital for understanding how our country is doing, how our economy is working.
And there's a worry that with less funding, less staff, the quality of that data will suffer.
Right. Smaller sample sizes, less accurate results. Imagine what that could mean for something like the Consumer Price Index.
Which, of course, directly affects things like Social Security payments.
Oh.
A small error in the CPI could have huge consequences for millions of Americans.
Absolutely.
And it's not like these agencies have been swimming in money to begin with. Their funding has been stagnant for years.
Yeah, and at the same time, fewer people are actually responding to surveys. It's like a double whammy. It's going to be tough for them to maintain the same level of quality with these cuts.
Now, another area where the government is causing a stir. Trump and his, well, you could call it an attack on America's elite universities. He's been threatening their federal grants, even withholding funding in some cases.
It's a big departure from how the U.S. government has typically interacted with higher education. And it raises some serious questions about academic freedom, the independence of these institutions.
And we're not talking hypotheticals. Princeton University had dozens of research grants suspended with no explanation.
And Christopher Eisgruber, Princeton's president, he's been pretty outspoken about this. He said canceling grants to Columbia University was the greatest threat to American universities since the Red Scare.
Wow, that's a heavy comparison. And then there's Harvard.
Potentially losing up to $9 billion in grants over accusations that they're not doing enough to protect Jewish students. Plus, they're accused of promoting divisive ideologies, whatever that means.
Right. And the University of Pennsylvania had $175 million in grants suspended because of a transgender woman on their women's athletic team. It's clear this administration is targeting specific ideological issues.
It is, and some legal experts say these actions might not even be legal.
Really?
Yeah, there are supposed to be hearings, reports to Congress, all this procedural stuff before funding can be cut off.
So it seems like Trump is really testing the limits here. And, you can't ignore the political context. Elite universities have become targets.
Seen as bastions of the liberal elite, breeding grounds for all those woke ideas that the right loves to hate. It's a way for Trump to play to his base.
Okay, here's a political surprise. Canada's Liberal Party is having a moment. Their popularity in the polls has skyrocketed.
A 25-point jump in just 100 days. That's got to be some kind of record. And a lot of it seems to be because Justin Trudeau stepped down.
Really? And who took his place?
Mark Carney.
Mark Carney.
Okay.
I'm not super up on Canadian politics. Is he popular?
Well, The Economist's model is giving him an 83% chance of winning the next election. So yeah, you could say he's popular.
Wow. So what's his appeal?
It's a few things. Trudeau was starting to wear on people. Plus, there's Trump down south acting, Trump. And Carney is seen as a steady hand, a safe choice.
Interesting. All right, let's move on to Peru. They've been going through a lot recently.
Yeah. After that outcry over the killing of Mr. Flores, President Boluarte had to declare a state of emergency in Lima.
And call for new elections, right?
Exactly, a year from now. But Peru is facing some deep-rooted problems. A huge informal economy, corrupt police, a lot of people relying on the cocaine and gold trades just to get by.
And those contract killings, the extortion rackets, it's out of control.
Yeah. Even with the state of emergency, it's going to be tough to restore order. People are desperate. They're talking about wanting a Peruvian Bukele, like the president of El Salvador with his iron fist approach to crime.
Mm-hmm. That's a worrying sign. And over 40 political parties have already registered for those elections.
Sounds like it's going to be a chaotic and unpredictable race.
Okay, here's a fascinating economic ripple effect. We're seeing a surge in remittances from the U.S. to Latin America.
Especially to places like Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, all driven by fear.
Fear of deportations under Trump, right?
Exactly. People are sending money back home just in case they get forced to leave.
Makes sense. But it might not last, right?
The article suggests that if those mass deportations actually start happening, remittances could dry up pretty fast.
Another reminder that politics has real-world consequences. Speaking of which, let's talk about Myanmar. They were hit by that massive earthquake recently.
Yeah. A devastating tragedy. And of course, the ruling junta is trying to use it to their advantage, projecting this image of competence, compassion.
Which is pretty hard to swallow given their track record.
Right. And it's impossible to know the real death toll. The official number is around 3,000, but with the communications down and the junta controlling information.
Yeah, who knows what's really going on. And getting aid to the people who need it is proving to be a nightmare.
The civil war, the rebel-held territories. There are reports that the junta is directing aid to their own areas rather than where the needs are greatest. It's a real mess.
And the article suggests that international governments should try to bypass the junta.
Yeah, channel the aid directly to those rebel-held areas. And some of those ethnic armed groups, they're actually pretty good at delivering aid to their own people.
Pragmatic, but risky. It could be seen as taking sides.
Definitely a difficult situation.
Over in Australia, their Labour government is feeling cautiously optimistic about the economy. But they're also worried that voters aren't really feeling it yet.
It's a common problem, isn't it? The economy might be on the upswing, but it takes time for people to actually see the benefits in their own lives.
Especially with the challenges they're facing.
Mm.
Low productivity, too much regulation, and businesses that are just too scared to take risks. It's going to take more than just optimism to fix all that.
It will. And Labor is hoping that the opposition, the Liberal Party, will keep shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, their lurch to the right hasn't really gone over well. They've been losing seats to those independent teal candidates.
Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, as they say.
Okay, let's go back to China and talk about coal. Shuzhou, a city in Shaanxi province, it's basically built on coal mining. And even though the percentage of electricity generated from coal is actually going down in China,
The total amount they're burning is still going up?
yeah, demand is just too high. It's a tough spot for them. They want to move towards cleaner energy, but they're still so reliant on coal.
And phasing it out completely is a huge challenge. All those jobs in the mining sector, the economic impact, it's not easy.
And they keep building those new coal-fired power plants, which, locks them into using coal for even longer
Makes it even harder to meet those carbon neutrality goals they've set for themselves.
and undermines the whole global fight against climate change.
Hmm.
Okay, let's talk about a less obvious issue. China's black market for personal data. It's huge. It's like the Wild West out there.
And it's kind of ironic, right? You've got this incredibly surveilled society, but at the same time, their personal data is being bought and sold like crazy.
There was even that case with the daughter of a Baidu executive. She was allegedly accessing user data through her dad's position.
It's a reminder that even in a place like China, people are worried about their privacy, about how their data is being used.
Yeah, and the government's not helping. They collect so much data themselves, and their systems aren't exactly airtight. It's creating a perfect storm for abuse.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to Panama. This BlackRock deal to buy those ports from C.K. Hutchison. It's gotten messy. Trump's saying it'll give America back control of the Panama Canal, which has really upset China.
Yeah. It's turned into a geopolitical football. They're accusing Panama of being a U.S. puppet, even though Panama's actually been pretty friendly with China in recent years.
And China's not just talking. They're reportedly pressuring state-owned firms to cut ties with anyone connected to CKH's owner.
It's a way to flex their economic muscle, try to make the deal fall apart. And Panama has some options, too. They could audit the port concessions or even go for a constitutional challenge.
But that could backfire, right? Especially with Trump adding fuel to the fire.
It could. China might just dig in their heels even harder.
What do you think Xi Jinping will do?
Hard to say. He's been pretty quiet about the whole thing. Could be a strategy. Keep everyone guessing, build up some leverage for future negotiations with Trump. It's all part of the game.
Right, back to Sudan. Things are shifting there. General Burhan and the Sudanese Armed Forces, they've taken back Khartoum after being pushed out almost 2 years ago.
It's a big turning point in the conflict. A lot of it comes down to those foreign backers. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, even Russia, Turkey, and Iran are involved.
And now that the SF has the upper hand, those backers might push for negotiations with the RSF.
Makes sense. A ceasefire, some kind of peace deal. Nobody wants this war to drag on forever.
But it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
Even within the SF, you've got all these different factions, local defense units, militias from Darfur. Getting everyone on the same page won't be easy.
Not at all. And so far, there's no sign of either side backing down. We're still hearing reports of fighting, the SF bombing civilian areas, the RSF setting up their own government.
And the UAE, they're a key backer of the RSF, and they haven't stopped sending them weapons. It's like everyone's got their own agenda.
It's a messy situation.
Let's talk about the potential for elections in Ukraine. President Zelensky has said he wants to be ready for a vote by late April if a full ceasefire is in place.
Ambitious, to say the least. Holding elections in the middle of a war is incredibly complex. Just the logistics of it, making sure everyone can vote safely, it's a huge undertaking.
And there's that deadline of May 5th for the Ukrainian parliament to decide whether to extend martial law. They'd have to cancel it to even start the election process. They have a tight time frame.
It is. And even if they do manage to hold elections this summer, or even by fall, like former President Poroshenko is predicting, you have to wonder how legitimate they can really be. So many voters are displaced in occupied territories abroad.
It's going to be tough.
No doubt. And then there's the political maneuvering. Poroshenko says his campaign basically started back in February when his assets were frozen. He clearly sees this as his chance to get back in power.
Now let's talk about something a little darker. The relationship between Russia's military and its security services, the FSB, it's not exactly friendly.
You always have some tension between those groups, but in Russia, it's particularly bad. Putin doesn't trust the army.
So he relies on the FSB to keep them in check. And they've got this whole division dedicated to spying on the military.
Their military counterintelligence force, it's basically the heir to the old Soviet SMRS. Their job is to watch the army, make sure nobody's getting any funny ideas about challenging the Kremlin.
We're even hearing whispers of purges within the military.
Gets you thinking, doesn't it, about all those purges under Stalin.
It does. And after those early setbacks in Ukraine, some in the military were pointing fingers at the FSB, saying they provided bad intel.
And then there was that whole Prigozhin mutiny. The army didn't exactly rush to stop him, which says a lot about the level of trust there.
A lot of bad blood between those two groups.
A lot.
Let's move on to Ireland. They've always resisted joining NATO.
Yeah. Neutrality is practically a sacred word in Irish politics.
But things are changing, right? Especially with all the worries about Russia.
Their defense minister, Simon Harris, he's pushing for a big policy shift. He wants to get rid of that triple lock rule.
The one that requires UN Security Council approval for Irish troops to be deployed overseas. Dropping that would be huge.
It would. It would basically align them much more closely with NATO, even without formally joining.
But it's causing a lot of debate in Ireland. Some parties, especially Sinn Féin, are furious. They say it betrays Ireland's history, and they want a referendum on it.
It's a touchy subject for sure. But there are also those who say that closer ties with NATO could actually help with Irish unification.
How so?
The thinking is, if a unified Ireland was part of this bigger European security structure, it might ease the fears of those in Northern Ireland who are wary of unification.
Interesting. All right, let's head over to Germany now. They've got this policy called Mutterrente, which is a bonus payment for mothers who are receiving pensions.
Sounds nice, but it's costing them a fortune, like $5 billion this year alone. And over the next 20 years, they're looking at $50 billion.
Not exactly chump change. And now some economists are saying, hey, why should childless pensioners get the same benefits? They're calling for those benefits to be cut to help fund the Mutterrente.
Talk about a controversial idea.
It is. But the politicians are avoiding the issue.
Yeah, they don't want to touch pensions with a 10-foot pole. Too risky, too politically sensitive. But that just kicks the can down the road, creates a bigger problem for the future.